the gold that we find in the Gemara said that there are 7 types of gold on planet Earth. And it's interesting, if you the amount of gold that was mined since the beginning of time is only about to fill up 3 swimming pools in the entire world since the beginning of time. So that shows you how rare it was. And the Chazal said it's located over 7 places of the earth, and there are 7 types of gold. So I just found that Gemara quite interesting. Okay, we're discussing over here. I just want to review yesterday. Yesterday we discussed how many pyres were on the Mizbeach. This is an aerial view of the Mizbeach. According to Rabbi Yossi, there was 4. This is the great big pyre where they burnt all the karbonos. Then we learned yesterday about the Maracha Shaniya Shel Ketoras. From here, they took the coals that they were going to use for the Ketoras Mizbeach HaPnimi that they did every day, right? So they had another pyre going. Then they had the Maracha Shel Kiyum Ha'esh. If you remember, the Kiyum Ha'esh means that in case this one, the Maracha Gedola, starts to extinguish and go out, they had an ongoing substitute fire where they could add fire to get this back fired up, so to speak. So this was a maracha of keeping the fire. Others learned that maracha shel kiyum eish that's the eish tamid, the fire that's supposed to always be burning on the mizbeach, because the maracha gedola probably went out, but this one always was kept on, and that's why in the shuls they have an eish tamid. Then we learned that actually there's a Shitas Rab Meir, and this is important because we're going to be discussing his opinion. Rab Meir said that there was a 4th one every day, a 4th one over here, so or maybe it was over here somewhere. And basically, what was that used for? That was used for in case there was limbs and fats that were not consumed overnight. So the next day, they would put it onto this new fire. They would light up a whole new maracha, no whole new pyre, and then those that weren't consumed the night before, or they popped off. A lot of times the meat would just fly off the bonfire. If it flew off and landed on a mizbeach, the next day they would put it onto a new maracha to consume the ones that didn't make it overnight. And then we learned the maracha that we learned about what? That there's another maracha on Yom Kippur, which means that on Yom Kippur they had another bonfire. That from this the Kohen Gadol took the coals for the Kodesh Kedoshim. Hi, Louis. We just started.
Hi.
Okay, so here's the thought. Now, just one more point before we begin. I just want to review with you where did we see in the Chumash that there were 5 pyres on the Mizbeach? This is what we discussed. You're supposed to say this every morning in davening, if they give you enough time. So, my shulshare, we give you 5 minutes to put on your tefillin, say brachas, and say all the karbanos, and be ready by Haidu 7:05. Or if you daven by an earlier minyan, it's 4 minutes. But part of the service is you say this parsha. It talks about the Trumas Hadeshin. And here the Torah talks about this is the laws of the Oila. It should be burning. It's on the mizbeach a whole night till the morning. And here it says ve'esha mizbeach tukaboy. There's a fire tukad. One time it says the word tukad. There's a fire on the mizbeach. Then the Chumash talks about the doing of the Trumas Hadeshin. Then the pasuk says again v'ha'esh ala mizbeach tukaboy. Another fire. So we see that already 2 times tukad means there's 2 pyres going on the mizbeach. That's Maracha Gedola and Maracha Shniya Shel Ketoras. Then Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir had one from the extra vav. The extra vav teaches you that there was another pyre. There was another pyre for Kima Eish, and then there was a 4th one for Yom Kippur, the hay, the extra hay on Vaha Eish. And then there's another one, Eish Tamid Tukat Al Mizbeach. So according to Rameya, there was another one. This was another time it says Tukat, right over here. But the others disagree. Okay? And then there's an Isser Daraisa, which we're going to discuss today, of Loi Sichba. What does Lo Sichba mean? You're not allowed to extinguish any of those fires on the Mizbeach. It's a lav d'oraisa. Okay, let's go into the Gemara. It's pretty straightforward, the Gemara. 2 lines from the top on Daf Memvav Amud Aleph. Okay, here we go. Amar Rab Laza Mishum Bar Kapara. Rab Laza said in the name of Bar Kapara, Oimer Hoy Rabbi Meir. Rab Meir used to say, now, Rab Meir used to say, and that means Rab Laza was saying that this is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. What's the opinion of Rabbi Meir? Remember, Rabbi Meir said that every day you had 4 pyres going on the Mizbeach, and on Yom Kippur you had 5. So he said like this. This is what Rabbi Meir says. Evrei oila shnitaisru. If you have evrei oila, the limbs of an oila, that just somehow got left over, that didn't get consumed the night before. So then Oisen lehen marocha b'fnei atzba. They made another pyre, right? Pyre number 4, and beside they would put these aver oilim that didn't get burnt or they popped off. They would put it on a separate fire. So that's statement number 1. Then Rabbi Laza said in the name of Rabbi Meir, va'afilu b'Shabbos. That means that they made these fires even on Shabbos, and they would make that 4th pyre on Shabbos also. You see, if you went into the Beis Hamikdash on Shabbos, you would think you were going into Lahavdil, a Reform temple. There's shechting going on, people are lighting fires, but in the Beis Hamikdash, that was all permitted on Shabbos. Because the Torah says, Lo Savaru Eish, you're not allowed to light a fire, B'chol Ma'ishrisechem, wherever you reside. But no one lives in the Beis Hamikdash, so that lav of don't start a fire does not apply in the Beis Hamikdash. So in the Beis Hamikdash, they were lighting all these fires on Shabbos, and they would have 4 of them on Shabbos. So that's what he said, that even on Shabbos, you're allowed to make that 4th pyre for those Avrim that did not make it. Now remember, when were they makar of that carbon? They were makar of a carbon Friday afternoon. That was the Talmud Shel Bein Arbayim. So if those Avrim got popped off the maracha on Friday night, and the next morning you see it never was consumed, they're allowed to make a fire to put back those Averim on Shabbos. So it's not even a carbon of Shabbos. It was a carbon of Friday afternoon. It somehow didn't get consumed on Friday night. You make a brand new fire, and you put those leftover Averim, those leftover limbs on this new fire. So the Gemara asks, "My kamashmalah, what is Rab Laza teaching you?" On the first teaching. The first teaching was that Rab Laza said that they used to make a 4th maracha for those Avrei Oilam that were left over. Wait a second, I don't need Rab Laza to say that in the name of Rab Meir. Tainina, we learned in a brisa that Rab Meir actually said, B'chol yoim, every single day, hoyasham arba marachos. There were 4 marachos, there were 4 pyres. So what has Rab Laza said? That they made another one to put the Avrei Oilish and the Taisru that were left over. It's clear that Rab Meir said that himself. Rab Oven explained, I didn't need Rab Laza to explain Rabbi Meir, Ela lepesulin. Let's say that if you have Avrim of Oila that were somehow they were not supposed to be brought onto Mizbeach. For example, let's say you have an Oila, the guy brought an Oila, and the blood got spilled out. So that carbon is puzzle. If you never sprayed sprinkling on the Mizbeach, that carbon is puzzle. What happens? You put the limbs on the Mizbeach anyway. So it's a puzzle of carbon that ended up on the Mizbeach. So you don't take it off, you let it burn on the Mizbeach. What happens if those Avrim were left over the next day? So even for those Avrim, you would still make a brand new fire for those Avrim that weren't supposed to be on the Mizbeach in the first place. You make a brand new fire for them and to consume them. V'dafka, only when do we say the psulim, you make a brand new fire for them? Shamosh lo behen hu'ur. That it started being burned already on the regular maracha gedola, on the regular pyre. It started being burned, and therefore it was so to speak, the mizbeach started to chew on it and then spit it out, and it ended up on the mizbeach, but was not in the fire. The next day, you make a brand new pyre on the side and you burn it. Avol loy mashla behen ho'or. But let's say the fire did not consume. Let's say it never got singed by the fire. So in the first place, and the next morning you find it's whole, it's raw, and it wasn't burnt at all, then you don't make a brand new fire for it. You just put it back on the Maracha Gedola. You just kick it, but I'm sure you shovel it back onto the Maracha Gedola. But to make a brand new fire for this, you wouldn't make a brand new fire. So that was by psulim. But let's say you have kosher meat by a korban that was kosher, that was not pasul. There, even if it wasn't consumed at fire, it was raw kosher korban. Even then, you would make a brand new fire to burn it the next day. That was by a kosher korban. But this exception was this qualification was only said by psulim. But Ika de Amre, others say there's no difference. Echad kesherin, the echad pesulim, whether it's a kosher korban, whether it's a pasul korban. When do I make a brand new fire for them? If it had some fire, if it was consumed a little bit on the mizbeach during the night, but it wasn't totally consumed, and then the fire went out, then you make a side fire for these limbs. In this the Eloi, but if it wasn't consumed at all, it didn't even it wasn't even taken in at all from the Maracha Gedola, loy. Then you don't make a brand new fire. You just light up the Maracha Gedola again, and let it consume that way. So that explains what Rab Lazar's Chiddush is. Rab Lazar's Chiddush is that according to one version is that even by psulim you make a brand new fire, but it qualifies only if it already had a singeing on during the night. If not, then we don't make a brand new fire. That's the first step. The next thing he said, va'afilu b'Shabbos, that even on Shabbos you would make 4 pyres. You'd make 4 fires going on the Shabbos, even on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, I don't even need Rab Lazar to tell me that, because Rab Meir said, Tanina, we learned v'hayom chomesh. Rab Meir would say that every day you had 4, and on Yom Kippur you had 5. Well, Yom Kippur you're not allowed to even light a fire at all, and still Rab Meir said that on Yom Kippur you had 5. The 1 extra for Yom Kippur, and the 4 that you had all year round, which included that extra fire for the Averim, Oilish, and Taisru. So what is Rab Lazar teaching you in the words of Rab Meir when Rab Meir himself said that? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Itzrich. I need him to teach you that. Because just from Reb Meir's alone, I would have said, on Shabbos you don't make this fire. Why? Salka Daita Chamida, where I would have thought, Hani Mili, when were these words written? That Reb Meir said that on Yom Kippur you make 5. Heicha Dechol Yom HaKippurim Liyos Achar Shabbos. If Yom Kippur fell out after Shabbos, so anyway, these karbonos were brought on Shabbos, so then after Shabbos on Yom Kippur, if Yom Kippur is on a Sunday, then I allow you to make 5 for the Aver, Oilish, and the Toisru. But the Chelve Shabbos, because things that were brought on Shabbos, Kravim Yom Kippurim, and you can bring them on Yom Kippur. Avol be'emtza Shabbos, if Yom Kippur falls out on a Tuesday, I would think Rameh will hold that what? You'd only make 4 fires, not 5, because that's an extra fire that you shouldn't have to make on Yom Kippur. Kamash Malan comes to teach you that no matter when Yom Kippur falls out, you always make 5 pyres on Yom Kippur. The one for the special day Yom Kippur, and even another one for Avery, Oilish, and Toisri. For the Erev, Yom Kippur carbonos that didn't make it, you make a fire for them. And that's a big chiddush, because these carbonos were not brought on Yom Kippur. They were brought the day before. And yet on Yom Kippur, I guess the Kohen Gadol is going to make another fire for those carbonos that were not consumed Erev Yom Kippur. You make this fire to consume them. Amar Rava, so Rava said, I don't even need Rab Lazar to teach me that. I can figure it out on my own from the words of Rameir. Man hai derleichayish lekimcha. Who's this person that's not concerned about his flour? That's another way of saying. Is who's this person that doesn't think things over? When you're making flour, you have to make sure that there's no dirt or pebbles in there. So when someone says something that's very silly, he's the expression that the Chazal use. Who is this person that's not concerned about his flour? Because he's saying things that are unnecessary. Why? Because Rav Meir himself said, B'chol yoim, every day you made 4. And B'chol yoim, Tanan, Rav Meir said every day you made 4, which means Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, even Shabbos you made 4 fires, on 4 pyres. So therefore, obviously Rav Meir holds, even on Shabbos, I would make this extra fire. So I don't need Rav Loza to teach me that. Kasha, that is a good question. Now, the Gemara continues and says, so far we learned that according to Rabbi Meir, Friday afternoon, you have a carbon, Talmud, that you brought and you put it onto the Mizbeach. If you wake up on Shabbos morning and you see that the animal was not consumed, that the limbs that was on the Mizbeach not consumed, you make a separate pyre, a separate fire for them, and you put those limbs over there. That idea, upligi de Rav Huna, that argues a Rav Huna. That statement of Rav Lazar would argue against Rav Huna, the Amar, who said, Tchi lasoi, to shech the carbon on Shabbos, let's say, doicha. To shech the carbon on Shabbos, that Shabbos move is overridden. We do karbonos on Shabbos, right? The regular musaf and the Talmud Shel Shachar. But soifoi, to burn things up on the Mizbeach, eino doicha. That means that if something was brought on Erev Shabbos, and then Friday night it didn't get consumed, Shabbos morning you will not allow to make a fire to put it back on the Mizbeach. That's what Rabbi Huna said. That's not like what Rabbi Loza said. That's the way we interpret Rav Huna. But not everybody interpret Rav Huna that way. Let's see. Gufa, we learned. Amar Rav Huna made a statement. Tamid. The carbon tamid on Shabbos, on whatever. Carbon tamid on Shabbos, or carbon tamid during the weekday, tchilasoi doicha, shechting, the beginning of the carbon, overrides, soifoi, but putting it on the Mizbeach, eina doicha, will not override. What does that all mean? My eina doicha. What does this mean? It doesn't override. Now, the carbon tamid override Shabbos. That you know. Shabbos morning, they shechted the carbon tamid shel shachar. Granted. But the tamid would also override another halacha. If every kohen was tameh, so the tuma, dechuya b'tzibra, during the tzibur, if the whole tzibur is tameh, the tuma will override. So you would be allowed to shech the carbon tamid betuma. Now, so you're allowed to do it on Shabbos, and you're allowed to even do it betuma. But what does it mean, soifoi eina doicha? My eina doicha. What does it mean that the bringing of the carbon on the Mizbeach will not override? You can't do that. Rav Chizda Omar, doiches a Shabbos ve'ina doiches a tuma. What he says, Rav Chizda says, that I grant you that you're allowed to shech the carbon betuma. Right? You're allowed to shech the tuma, dechuya betzibur. But you're not allowed to bring the animal, the sacrifice, to burn on the Mizbeach, because of tuma. To sprinkle the blood on the Mizbeach and to shech the carbon, that's permitted. But to put the tamei carbon on the Mizbeach, that's not permitted. What is permitted? What is permitted is doiches Shabbos. That means that if a carbon on Erev Shabbos was not consumed on the Mizbeach on Shabbos, then you're allowed to relight it and bring it on the Mizbeach on Shabbos, even though it was a carbon of Erev Shabbos. That's what Rav Chizda interprets Rav Huna. Rabba Amar, Rabba says, doiches a tuma ve'ena doiches Shabbos. Rabba says just the opposite. Regarding tuma, if you shechted a carbon betuma, you're allowed to bring it up on the Mizbeach. You're allowed to burn the averim, the limbs on the Mizbeach, even though everybody is tamei. The eina doiches a Shabbos. But Rabba holds that Rav Huna meant to say, and this is what we interpreted Rav Huna, that if a carbon was brought on Friday, you cannot put it back on the Mizbeach on Shabbos. I guess you can't make a new fire for it and burn it on the Mizbeach on Shabbos. That's what Rav Huna said. Now, Amalei Abaya l'Rabba. Abaya said to Rabba, Lididak kasha, according to your opinion, I have a question. Ula Rav Chizda kasha. And according to Rav Chizda, I have a question. Because basically, you're dividing the difference between Tumah and Shabbos. Either Tumah is Dechuya or Shabbos is Dechuya. One overrides and one's not overriding. But according to you, my Shanat Tumah, why do you say Tumah overrides? That means Tumah could override the carbon, and you could allow to put it on the Mizbeach. Diksiv b'mayadoi, because it says in the pasuk b'mayadoi. It says when you're supposed to bring tzavis b'nei Yisrael v'yamar lambs karbanin lachmili yishai reidach l'shmu lahakriv li b'mayadoi. In the carbon Talmud it says bring it b'mayadoi in its time. So you say b'mayadoi means va'afil b'tumah. You're allowed to bring it up in Tumah. If you're makar of the carbon Talmud b'tumah, put it on the Mizbeach b'tumah. So the question is, Shabbos Name, if carbon was brought, since Shabbos you're allowed to shecht karbonis Talmud, so b'mayadoi means Shabbos, everything is overridden. Even for a carbon that was brought on Erev Shabbos, you should override Shabbos and you should be allowed to put it on the Mizbeach even on Shabbos, because Shabbos, the whole idea of burning things is overridden on Shabbos, on the Mizbeach. So why do you differentiate between Tumah and that you're allowed to be burnt on the Mizbeach, and Shabbos, which is a carbon from Erev Shabbos, you say, no, you can't put it on the Mizbeach on Shabbos. Why? How do you differentiate that? And same idea, Rav Chizda Kasha. Rav Chizda said just the opposite of you. My Shana, what is the difference? Diksiv b'moy adoi. He said, Va'afilu b'Shabbos. Rav Chizda said that, according to Rav Huna, b'mayadoi, the word mayadoi allows you to take karbonis from Friday and put it on the Mizbeach and relight a fire on Shabbos to burn it on Shabbos. So why didn't you say tumanami when you bring a carbon betumah and you shechted it betumah? B'mayadoi, the word b'mayadoi should allow you to bring it onto the Mizbeach v'afilu betumah. Even betumah you should be allowed to burn it. In other words, how could you split an atom over here? Amalei, so Rabbi explained intellectual honesty. He defended himself and he defended Rav Chizda. Loyal lididi kasha, loyal Rav Chizda kasha. I don't have a difficulty between me and I don't have a difficulty on Rav Chizda. Lididi like kasha, I don't have a difficulty on me. Soifai kit chilasai. There's a difference. The end, putting things on the Mizbeach is called soifai. Chilasai is shchita. So let's examine. We go to Memvav Amud Sheni. Tumah the tchilasoi bar mitche tumehi. Tumah, when all the kahanim are tameh, you're allowed to shecht the carbon because it overrides tumah. Carbon tamid overrides tumah. Soifoi name dachi. So then the carbon itself should be overridden, and you're allowed to put it on the mizbeach. That's why I hold if you shechted the carbon betumah, you're allowed to finish the job and put the whole carbon on the mizbeach betumah. But Shabbos, this carbon, what are we talking about over here? Our subject matter is the carbon that was brought on Friday. Okay, the carbon that was brought on Friday, and you found the limbs Shabbos morning that were not consumed, can you reburn them? But the Friday carbon, you can never bring on Shabbos. The tchilasai, the shechting of a Friday carbon, lav bar mitcha Shabbosu. You cannot push away Shabbos, override Shabbos of that Friday carbon, because only Shabbos carbons you could shecht on Shabbos. A Friday carbon, you can't shecht on Shabbos. And in fact, you can't even spray the blood, Rashi says, on Shabbos. Let's say you shechted the Talmud Shabbein Rabbayim. After Shkia, you can't spray the blood on Mizbeach. Nothing of the carbon, of a Friday carbon, can be done on Shabbos. Therefore, soifoi, just being mocked or something, and burning on the Mizbeach, that carbon, nami loy dochi, will not doich Shabbos. Because it's a Friday carbon, that therefore, on Shabbos morning, if it wasn't consumed, it wouldn't be override Shabbos. Rav Chizda loy kashe. According to Rav Chizda, we don't have this difficulty either. Soifoi kitchilasoi lesla. He doesn't you don't compare the end to the beginning. You don't compare makter to shchita. They have nothing to do with each other. So what's Rav Chizda's logic? He says like this: Shabbos, duhutra hibit tzibur. On Shabbos, all karbonos tzibur were permitted to bring on Shabbos. So therefore, you're allowed to shecht and makriv karbonos in Shabbos because it's permitted. Not only overrides, but it's totally permitted. Soifoi namidari. So then, just being makter any carbon, even if it's a carbon from Friday that just never made it, you can burn it on Shabbos, because the whole idea of burning things on the Mizbeach was actually hutra, was actually permitted to be done on Shabbos. So a carbon that made it onto the Mizbeach from Friday afternoon, you're allowed to burn it and completely Shabbos morning. If it didn't get consumed, light a fire for it and burn it. Tuma, the dechuya bat tzibur. Tuma generally is overridden in tzibur, because really Hashem doesn't want you to bring a carbon when you're tameh. But if there's no choice and you have to bring a carbon tamid and every kohen is tameh, truma overrides bitzibur. But it's an override. It's not a lechatchila thing. So therefore, tchilasoi, shechting, the ike kapara, which is the main idea, which is the main thing, dachi. Then we say tuma overrides. But to take that same carbon that you shechted betuma and throw it onto the mizbeach, soifoi, to throw that to end off the service, the lav ika kapara, that's not the main kapara, loy dachi. It wouldn't override Shabbos. So that ends
Vernon,
this.
I have a quick question. So on Shabbos, so a Friday korban, if you're not allowed to shecht it on Shabbos, but a Shabbos korban you could check.
Yeah, and actually they burned it on the mizbeach because.
Okay. So the question actually is, you said that the korban sibor is allowed is allowed on Shabbos. Is that
right?
To
hutra hu b'tziba.
What about? Didn't the Kohen also have a private korban that he had to do on Yom Kippur as well for himself?
Oh, okay. So yes, and on the behalf, it was both. Actually, it was a carbon for himself and a certain sibor called the family of Kahanim.
Right.
So but there the Torah says to do that on Yom Kippur. So that's clearly that.
So clearly, even if it's if Yom Kippur falls on a Shabbos, even if it's not at Sibor, if it's sort of a private thing for the Kohen himself or the family, obviously that's allowed because it's from Deoraisa.
Right. Yes,
Okay.
and it wasn't just the family. I think it's the whole Shavit of the Kahanim. It's not just his family, but it's all the Shavit. One of the interesting things that they ask on this, like Tumah Hutra Hibitzibar, is what. Let's say on Shabbos, Pekuach Nefesh. You have to save a life on Shabbos. So let me throw out a question to you. What happens? You have a guy. He's supposed to save his life on Shabbos, and he needs to eat meat. You could feed him nevela, or you could shecht an animal and give him kosher meat to eat, and that way you'll save his life. Is pekuach nefesh dechuya on Shabbos, or is it hutra on Shabbos? If it's dechuya on Shabbos, then we would not allow you to shecht, because shechting on Shabbos is a doraisa, so you would feed him the nevela on Shabbos. But if you're saying saving a life on Shabbos is hutra, then you would actually feed him the nevela. It's hutra, you would actually be allowed to shecht on Shabbos. Or let me give you another example. You have two guys to save on Shabbos, right? One guy you don't be mechal Shabbos for, but you could save his life. One guy you could be mechal Shabbos for. So who should you work on? It depends. Is pekuach nefesh hutra? Then that means there's you could work on anyone, or if it's dechuya, and you could only work on one of them, so you should work only on the one that you're not going to be mechal Shabbos. So these are all questions regarding pekuach nefesh that are discussed.
There's also another question of if let's say the person needs something to eat, meat for some reason, or needs something that and there's a nevela and there's something that you could shech, even if you shouldn't even be delayed it even a minute to make the shech because otherwise the person could literally
die,
pass away.
Right, but we're talking about, let's say he's not going to die. Let's say you have 10 minutes, or you have 20, you have a half hour. Yeah. Should you bechal Shabbos to give him kosher meat, or should you give him from the cafeteria?
Right.
So that's a big question. That's a question. We're assuming that he's not going to die. Okay. One of the things that, by the way, once we're on the topic of this topic, the minig chasam sofer was not to have salt on the Friday night challah. We always dip the challah into salt. Why do we dip the challahs into salt? Because your table is like a shulchan, is like the mizbeach. And every time before they put something onto the fire of the mizbeach, they actually salted it. Al kol karboncha takrav melach. So to remind ourselves that your table is like a mizbeach, so we put salt on the challah prior to starting the meal. But remember, on Friday night, they could not bring a carbon. They couldn't burn a carbon on the mizbeach Friday night, because on Friday afternoon they shechted the tamid. They put it right away on the mizbeach, and if it wasn't on the mizbeach, you couldn't push it back onto the mizbeach Friday night. And even Shabbos morning, there is an opinion here in the Gemara that Shabbos morning, if it popped off, they didn't put it back onto the Mizbeach. So, therefore, there was never a chance of putting a meat with salt on the Mizbeach on a Friday night. Therefore, Friday night, he did not have salt on his table.
Mm-hmm.
That's what others say, that just stamazai, since there's a mitzvah of oina to be with your wife, and there's actually a mitzvah to eat garlic erev Shabbos, that's a Tekanas Ezra, to make you more potent, and salt makes you more unpotent, and therefore that's why they wouldn't have salt on Shabbos. Mm-hmm. So it all comes from all these Gemaras. Okay, one more easy Gemara here. Itma we learned hamachabe eish. If someone hamachta umenoira, a guy who extinguishes. Now the Torah says don't extinguish, right? Loi sichbe, don't extinguish the fire. What happens? A guy took the shovel of coals. He meant it to be used to fire up the menorah, or to fire up he shoveled out the coals to use it for the mizbeach hapnimi, for the ketoras, right? Or for the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, okay? The Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. And somebody extinguished that fire. Abaya says chayav. You're still chayav because it came from the Mizbeach, and therefore you're extinguishing fire coals that were from the Mizbeach. Rava says potter. Rava says you're potter because once you took it off the Mizbeach, you separated it from the Mizbeach, it's not called Mizbeach fire. And therefore it's not included in the law of don't extinguish. Now, the Gemara qualified. The kavya b'rosh shel mizbeach. If you extinguish it on top of the mizbeach, if you went, even though you have it in the shovel, but you're still on top of the mizbeach, and your shovel was meant to use for the menorah or meant to use for the kodesh kadoshim, still kuli amid like pligi like chayav. Nobody would argue that if you extinguish it on top of the mizbeach, that you're chayav. Ki pligi. When is the argument? The achte aara. You took it off the mizbeach. You took it off the mizbeach and put it on the ground, right? And the kavi, and then you extinguish it. Abaya Oma chayev. Abaya says it's still. Abaya says it's chayev, right? Abaya says it's chayev. Rava says potar. Why? Rava says, I'm sorry, I'm looking. Rava says potter. Why? Kivin de nitka. Since you removed it off the mizbeach, it's not mizbeach fire. You actually put it on the ground, let's say on the side of the mizbeach. So therefore, that's not called fire of the mizbeach, and you're not chayiv. So the Gemara says, Elo, let me ask you a question. Ha da Amar Rab Nachman Amar Rababu. You have a statement from Rab Nachman who said, Hamoirid gacheles ma'al mizbeach. A guy takes a coal off the mizbeach, right? He put it down on the floor, v'kiba, and he extinguished it. Chayiv, he would be liable. So come on, would you say that this Rab Nachman a paskin like Abaya? That's odd because we don't really paskin like Abaya. So the Gemara says, Afilatei Rava. You could say Rab Nachman would hold like Rava. So why are you chayiv in that case? Hossam, in Rab Nachman's case, lo intek lemitzvasa. You didn't remove it for a mitzvah. You actually just removed it, but we're not going to use it for the menorah. You were not going to use it for the ketoras or the kodesh kadoshim. You just removed it and put it on the floor. So therefore it's still called eish hamizbeach because you could actually return it back to the mizbeach if you wanted to. So therefore that's called mizbeach coals, and therefore even if you extinguish it, you'll be chayiv, even if it's on the floor. But Rava's case is talking about intika lemitzvasa. When you removed it from the mizbeach, you were actually intending to do a mitzvah, intending to use it for the menorah, for the ketores, and therefore it loses its name mizbeach fire. And therefore, if you extinguish it, you wouldn't be liable. But the only machlokes is if you extinguish it after taking it off from the mizbeach. But while it's still on the mizbeach, even Rava would maida that is, even if you intended to use it for a mitzvah, but while you're standing on the mizbeach, there'll still be a lav. So one more version, ikadiyamar, just the other set, the opposite. The achte a'ara v'kavi. If you put it on the ground and extinguish it, the kuliyama loy pligi depota. Even Abaya would hold that you potter. Extinguish it once it's off the mizbeach. Boom, it's not part of mizbeach fire, and everybody wouldn't argue. Nobody would disagree that you potter. Ki pligi. When is the liability over here? The kavya b'roisha shemazbeach. The argument is if you extinguish it on top of the mizbeach. You shoveled out the coals from one of the marachas, and you said, I'm using it for the menorah, or I'm using it for ketoris. So it's now in a shovel in your hand, and you're on top of the mizbeach. So Abaya says chayav, because at the end of the day, you're liable if you extinguish it, because eisha mizbeachu. Since you're on top of the mizbeach, that's called the fire of the mizbeach. Rava says potter. Why? Kaven denitika, since you shoveled it out and separated it to use for another mitzvah, nitka, it's been separated, it's not called fire of the mizbeach. So the Gemara asks, finally, Elohah da Omer Rav Nachman, Omer Rabba Babua. Rav Nachman said in the name of Rabba Babua, Hamoyed gacheles me'al gabe amizbeach. Someone who takes a coal from off the mizbeach, the kiba, and he extinguishes it. It's chayev. He takes it off the mizbeach, puts it on the ground, extinguishes it. It's chayev. Come on, will that be like Abaya, like a Rava? Not like Abaya, not like Rava, because according to this version, when you take it off, and like we said in the first wide line, the achteva arava kavia kuliyamele pligi dipata. When you take it off the mizbeach and put it on the ground, both Abaya and Rava say yepater, and here Rav Nachman says yechayev. So is he not like Abaya and not like Rava? So the answer is again same idea. Hasam, Rav Nachman was talking about le'intik lemitzvah. You never removed it for any type of mitzvah. You took a coal off the mizbeach, not intending to use it for any mitzvah, and put it on the side of the mizbeach. So there, even if you extinguish it, yechayev, because it's still called fire of the mizbeach, and potentially you could still return that coal onto the mizbeach. So it's fire of mizbeach. If you extinguish it, yechayev. Hacha over here, where there is an argument, and Rabbi would say yechayev because intik lemitzvasa, it was separated out to use as a mitzvah. So, but you're still on top of the mizbeach. So because you're still on top of the mizbeach, Abaya says yechayev. Rava will say, but since you separated from the mizbeach and you separated to use for a mitzvah, even though you're standing there on top of the mizbeach, but you're standing there with the shovel full of coals, intending to use those coals for another mitzvah. So that's not called fire of the mizbeach, and therefore if you'd extinguish it, you're not being mechayev. Hadron Allah taraf bekalpi. Hadron Allah taraf bekalpi. With God's help, we finished taraf bekalpi. It's interesting. We discussed today about limbs that never get consumed on the mizbeach. This is like a remez that if a Jew didn't make it, we try to bring him back again, no matter what. Once he's already on the mizbeach, if they didn't make it the first night around, we try to burn him up the next morning because we don't want to lose any part of the carbon. And ganz Klal Yisrael.
What if a part fell off the mizbeach?
No, right. If it fell off, you put it back on the mizbeach.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, that's called, yes. I assume that it always pops onto the mizbeach, yes, but it falls off the mizbeach.
Some of those fires were on the corners. So
right.
It theoretically could easily have
right.
popped off. But you would do that even if it fell off?
The mizbeach fell off 32, fell off 62 feet. You would still pick it up and bring it back on. But I want to point out one thing which I should mention. We say you're not allowed to extinguish the fires. But we learned in our Mishnah that you would take a shovel of 4 kavs and transfer it to a shovel of 3 kavs. And 1 kav fell on the floor of the mizbeach. And what did they do with it? They swept it into the water system that was coming into the mizbeach, coming into the Beis Hamikdash. So they did extinguish things. You understand my question?
Yeah.
That we learned in the Mishnah that you were transferring the 4 into the 3. The answer is that that was Rabbeinu Simcha's question. So he says that we said we swept it into the Amma doesn't refer to the water base, to the Amma Samayim. It was like a little place over there, and we let it extinguish by itself. But Pashtus, it meant the water place that was also called Amma, but he learned it was something else. Mm-hmm. But then he gives a teretz that simply that when you took it off the mizbeach, your intention was not to bring it back onto the mizbeach and not to use it for a carbon. This was all part of the service, so that's considered that it was totally removed from the mizbeach, and it's not called Eisha mizbeach. So according to that teretz, you were allowed to throw it into the water after the transfer.
Even the act of sweeping it would extinguish some of it.
Right. That's what this Taisus talks about.
It's interesting that this is the second time I think that we talked about how Shabbos was related to Tumah. I think in Masechah Shabbos we talked about Shabbos and how we carry and how Tumah comes into play, how we follow the guidelines when Tumah, if it's Hutra or not. This is, I think, the second time that Shabbos was.
That's very good.
Right? Isn't that case? Didn't we talk about
Yes.
in Masechah Shabbos about that?
I'm just trying to find it on the side over here. But definitely, we talked about it in Masechta Pesachim also.
And Pesachim also, right?
Story
Yeah.
of Hillel. Ado. That was the whole story of Erev Pesach Shcholios Shabbos, right?
Right. Yep.
So that's it. Very good.
Wonderful.
Very good.
Have a good Shabbos, everybody. Okay,
Shabbos.
Sunday, Mitzvah Shem.
Sure.
Okay, bye-bye.